Hi everyone, on this week's episode I'm going to make a landscape diorama. The base that I'll be using for this diorama is one of my all-time favourite timbers, Australian Mallee Burl, and this piece has a beautiful grain pattern. Now unfortunately the top isn't too great, it's got a bit of damage to these spikes, but that's okay because we're going to carve most of this out. Before I get started, I want to give you a quick rundown of how I plan on doing this. To carve out the timber, I got myself a flap disc and some flap wheels. To mould the front of the ocean, I've got myself a container and cut it in half. I went to my local hobby shop and grabbed some landscaping supplies. Now in addition to all that, I'm also going to 3D print myself a monster and add an LED light. So now that you have a rough idea how I plan on making this, let's get started. Before I start, I need to line up where the ocean sits, then I'll use the bandsaw to put a couple of cuts in and then I can start carving. Now I'm not being too precise with this outline, it's just a rough guide. I will be making a lot of this up as I go along. One thing I do know is, at the top here, I want it to be low and flat because that's going to be the beach, and then we're going to create a bit of a rock wall around it. Now I'm not too sure how well this will work, but for the beach part I've got myself a hole saw with the drill bit taken out. I'm hoping I can drill down and chisel it out. That'll save time on a bit of carving. Before I attempt to chisel it out, I'm going to start carving the entrance to the beach. Now that I've carved a bit of the entrance away, it's time to start chiseling. So now that I've finished chiselling out the beach, it's time to get started on the rock wall. I tried using the flap wheel for this, but it didn't take me long to realise it wasn't as good as the disc. After finishing with the flap wheel, I decided to use the Dremel, but you'll see later on that this step was pointless. However, I did find it good to start carving in a set of stairs. As I was chiselling the rock wall, I decided to add in a little cave. So now that all the carving's finished, it's time to start painting, and for that I'm going to use some water-based acrylic. Now that I've finished putting on all the base colours, I can start highlighting the features. So now that I've finished highlighting all the rocks, it's time to add some foliage. I'm going to take the light green here and put it at the front of the cove. Then I'm going to take the larger, darker foliage and add it over the top. To glue down my foliage, first I'll spray some isopropyl alcohol, then I'll apply glue that I've made up using 3 parts acrylic matte medium and 1 part water. After gluing down the foliage, I decided to add some rock walls. For this, I used some modelling clay and rock chips. After I painted the rocks, I coated them in UV resin to give them a wet look. It's now time to add the beach, and for that I'm using some sand. Now that my sand's dry, it's time to paint the ocean. But before I do that, I'm going to drill myself a hole and add the LED light. While I was soldering, I decided to also add a light to the cave. I finished the wiring by adding in this switch battery box. To paint my ocean, I'm using a mixture of 3 different coloured pigments mixed with UV resin. So now that I've finished painting the main diorama, it's time to 3D print myself a monster. So unfortunately it looks like we had a failed print. You can see here that his arm failed to print. Now that's a big deal because his arm was meant to be reaching up, grabbing the diver. But I think I have a solution. Instead of spending another 6 hours printing this again, I went through one of Jake's old toy boxes and I found this. It's got these oversized creepy looking hands with claws on the end. I reckon if I snip one off and attach it to our monster, it'll look pretty good. So I made the decision to take his other arm off as well, because I think it'll look much better if we kept them matching. And now we don't have to worry about this guy hurting us anymore, because now he's armless. Now that I've finished modifying my monster, it's time to spray on some primer and then some colour. In addition to painting my monster, I've also painted myself a diver. Now once they're dry, I'll be able to stick them to the front of the diorama. You'll notice here as I'm gluing the monster on that I've added some rock chips to the front. This helps disguise the LED light. Well, as you can see, I've gone ahead and put the container on the front of the diorama. I glued down a piece of acrylic first and then I hot glued the container to that. So now we can pour our resin. And for that, I'll be using slow set art cast. I'm also going to add some blue alcohol ink. Well, as you can see, we've got quite a few bubbles in the resin, but I'm not going to put this one in the pressure pot. A lot of these bubbles will come out by themselves, and I'm kind of hoping that a few stay in, since it is an ocean. While I'm waiting for the resin to cure, I'm going to build myself a little walkway. I've cut myself out a little template, and I'm just going to use these toothpicks and matchsticks to make the bridge. So now that the resin's all cured, I can pop the mould off the front. Now once I've done that, I'm going to take some of this gel medium, I'm going to add some waves to the top and fill in the sides. To fill in the sides, I'm just going to add in some extra foliage. To add the waves against the rocks, I'm going to use some UV resin and some white pigment. I used a can of air to help spread the waves around. Well, I've got to admit, I feel like this is one of the best projects I've ever made. And if you think so too, let me know by leaving me a comment or hitting the like button. Now you'll also notice that I sealed the side of the timber with some linseed oil. That'll help protect it. So now that it's all finished, let's check it out.